I had posted for a cook, not a family, and that is the only thing I want set down plain before I tell the rest of it, because everything I did wrong that first day, I did out of a hard man's habit of expecting the worst and arming himself against it. I was 41 years old that autumn, and I had run the ironwood alone for 9 of those years, and I would have told any man who asked that I had made my peace with the quiet. I would have been lying, but I'd have said it with a straight face. A man can carry a lie like that a long way before the weight of it finally puts him down. The posting went up at Crab's Mercantile in Holly's Crossing on the first cold morning of October. WNTED, it read in my own crooked hand, a cook and housekeeper, steady and of good character, for a working ranch. Room and wages. Inquire ATEAGUE the Ironwood. I had put it up because old Hessler's wife, who'd kept my house and cooked for my 2 hands through the warm months, had gone east to bury her sister and not come back, and because a winter was bearing down out of the north that everybody in Sable County could already taste in their teeth, and because a man cannot mend fence and gather strays and break ice off the troughs and also keep a stove fed and bread in the box. I had figured on a widow of 50, broad and plain and sour, who would cook my beans and leave me be. That was the whole of my plan. I have learned since that the Lord has a particular fondness for the plans of men who think they want to be left alone. Her letter came back inside the week, written in a fine clear hand on paper that had been folded and refolded until it was soft as cloth. It said only that she was a widow, that she could cook and keep a house and was not afraid of hard work, that her character could be vouched for by the Reverend at Antelope Bend, and that she could come on the next stage if I would have her. She signed it Mrs. Della Mercer. There was nothing in it about children. I have thought a great deal since about that nothing, about how a person can tell the whole truth and still leave out the part that matters most, and how fear will make even an honest soul step careful around a thing. But I didn't think on it then. I wrote back 2 lines and a date, and I went on with my work, and I did not think on Mrs. Della Mercer at all until the day the stage set her down at Holly's Crossing in a wind that came straight off the snow that hadn't fallen yet. I'd driven the buckboard in to fetch her and a load of wire and flour. I was standing by the team with my collar up when the stage rocked in off the north road and the door swung, and she came down the step. She was not 50 and broad and sour. She was perhaps 30, thin in the way that tells you a person has been giving their share of supper to somebody else, with a face that had been pretty once and was something better than pretty now. It was a face that had been hit hard by life and had not gone soft and had not gone mean, which is the rarest thing I know. Her dress was good wool gone shiny at the elbows, brushed clean, mended where it needed mending in stitches so small you had to look for them. She carried a carpet-bag in one hand and held her shawl closed at the throat with the other, and she looked at me the way a person looks who has learned not to expect much and has decided to meet whatever comes with her chin up anyway. "You'll be Mr. Teague," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was low and even. "I am," I said. "You'd be the widow Mercer." "I would." She set the carpet-bag down by the wheel and put out her hand to shake, like a man, like somebody settling terms, and I took it because there was nothing else to do, and her hand was small and cold and her grip was stronger than I'd have guessed. "I can start tonight," she said, "if you'll show me your kitchen." I should have known then. There was a way she had of holding herself, a kind of bracing, like a person standing in a doorway who is ready for the door to be shut on them and has decided not to flinch when it is. I took it for road weariness. I loaded her bag and the flour and the wire, and I handed her up onto the seat, and we started the 9 miles back to the Ironwood with the cold coming down on us, and she sat straight beside me with her hands folded and asked me sensible questions about the size of the household and how many I cooked for and whether I kept a milk cow, and I answered them, and I thought, this will do. This plain, careful woman will cook my beans and keep my house and leave me be, and the winter will pass, and that will be the whole of it. I was wrong about every part of that, but I was most wrong about the leaving be. It was full dark and spitting the first hard pellets of snow, by the time I'd put the team up and showed her the house. The long, low main room with the stove, the larder, the little side room off the kitchen that had been Hessler's wife's and would now be hers. She moved through it quiet and quick, taking the measure of things, and within the hour she had a fire roaring and bacon in the pan and biscuits rising, and the smell of it filled that house the way nothing had filled it in 9 years, and I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen feeling like a stranger to my own good fortune. My 2 hands, Prute and the boy Eli, came in stamping snow and ate like they'd been starved, and they were courteous to her in the rough way of men who have forgotten there are women in the world, and she fed them and said little and watched everything. And I thought again, fool that I was, that I had got exactly what I'd asked for. Then, well past everyone's bedtime, with the snow coming down in earnest now and the wind starting to find the chinks in the walls, I went out to the barn to see to a mare that was due to foal late, carrying a lantern against the dark, and I heard a sound up in the hayloft that was not a sound any animal of mine makes. It was a child's cough, smothered against a sleeve. I stood at the foot of the loft ladder with the lantern up, and the light reached the edge of the hay, and there they were. 2 of them. A boy of maybe 11 with a thin, sharp, watchful face, sitting up straight in the hay with his arm thrown across a smaller shape. A little girl of 5 or 6 wrapped in a shawl that I recognized, because it was the same shawl their mother had had at her throat that afternoon. She had given it to them and gone without. The boy looked down at me over the lantern's glare, and he did not cry out and he did not cower. He set his jaw exactly the way his mother had set hers in the doorway of the stage, and he said, low so as not to wake the girl, "Don't holler at her. She didn't do nothing. It was me. I made her bring us. Holler at me." I have been ashamed of a great many things in my life. I have a list of them I keep in the dark hours. But the thing I am most ashamed of is what came up in me first, standing at the foot of that ladder, not pity, not wonder, but a hot black anger, the anger of a man who has been, as he sees it, deceived. I had asked for one thing and been brought 3. I had built my whole careful winter around a plain, sour widow who would leave me be, and here in my hay were 2 children with their mother's frightened eyes, and the future I'd planned cracked straight across, and I was too small a man that night to see what I'd been handed. I was only a man who'd been lied to. I went back to the house faster than I'd come out, and I found her standing in the kitchen waiting, because she had heard the barn door, and she knew. She knew the way Prey knows. She had her hands folded in front of her and her chin up and that bracing in her shoulders, ready for the door to be shut. "You've got children," I said. It came out hard. "I have," she said. 2, Caleb and Ruth. "They're no trouble, Mr. Teague. They'll work, the boy especially. He's strong for his age and willing. I'll feed them off my own plate. You'll not notice the cost of them. I'll keep them out from underfoot. I should have written it. I know I should have written it." Her voice didn't break, but it went very fast, and I understood that she had this speech ready, that she had said it before to other men in other doorways and had the door shut anyway. I wrote it 3 times and tore it up 3 times because I knew no man posts for a cook and means a cook and 2 children, and I had nowhere else, Mr. Teague. The bank took our place after my husband passed. There was nowhere else. So I lied to you by leaving it out, and that was wrong, and I'm sorry for it, and I'll go in the morning if you say to. But I'm asking you not to put 2 children out on the road tonight in this." And she stopped, and she did not beg, because I think she had decided long ago that she would do anything for those children except let them see their mother beg. She just stood there with her chin up and let me decide. Outside, the wind had got a voice. The snow was coming sideways now. The nearest place that wasn't mine was the Prute Soddy 4 miles off, and Holly's Crossing was 9, and there was no road tonight that a child could walk and live. I knew all that. And still, I want to be honest about how long I stood there with the meanness in me, weighing my cracked plans against 2 children's lives, before the man my mother had tried to raise finally elbowed past the man the years had made. "They'll catch their death in that barn," I said. "Bring them in by the stove. We'll talk of the rest in the morning." Something went out of her then, not relief exactly. She was too guarded for relief, but a kind of holding up that she'd been doing with her whole body, and for just a second I saw how tired she was, tired all the way down. Then she put her chin back up and said, "Thank you, Mr. Teague," in that level voice, and she went out into the snow herself to fetch them rather than send me, because she didn't trust me yet and she was right not to. She brought them in stamping and shivering, the boy walking stiff and proud with the little girl's hand in his, and the girl looking up at me out of that shawl with enormous solemn eyes, half asleep and frightened of me, and their mother got them down by the stove and fed them the biscuits she'd held back from supper for exactly this, and I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen for the second time that night, a stranger to it. The boy ate watching me the whole while, like a young dog that expects the boot. The girl fell asleep sitting up with a biscuit still in her hand, and I went off to my cold bed at the far end of the house and lay awake a long time listening to the wind hunt around the eaves, and to the small new sounds of children breathing in my house, and I told myself it was for one night only, until the storm broke, and then I would be fair about it, but I would be firm. I have been firm in my life about a great many things I had no business being firm about. The morning broke clear and brutal cold, a foot of new snow gone hard and glittering, the kind of morning that kills a man caught out in it, and I came into the kitchen to be firm, and Mrs. Della Mercer had been up since before the dark thinned. There was coffee. There was a breakfast on the table the like of which I had not sat down to since my mother died. The floor I'd tracked mud across for a year was scrubbed pale. The boy Caleb already had his coat on and was standing by the door with his chin up, waiting, and when I came in he said, before I could open my mouth, "I'll do the troughs, Mr. Teague, and the wood. Show me once and I won't need showing twice." And the little girl Ruth peeked at me from behind her mother's skirts and then hid, and her mother set a plate in front of me and stood back with her hands folded and her chin up, all of them braced, all three of them braced for me to be firm. I sat down, I ate, it was very good. The boy watched me eat with his hand on the door latch like he might bolt, and I found that the speech I'd had ready fair but firm, one more day, then the stage had gone to ash in my mouth, and what came out instead, gruff because I didn't know how to say it any other way, was, "Frost'll have split the trough ice. Take the maul that's hung inside the barn door, mind your feet on the planks. When you've done the water, there's a sled of wood wants splitting. I'll show you the stacking." The boy's whole body changed. It was like watching a fence post turn into a colt. He said, "Yes, sir," and he was gone out into the cold before I could add a single firm word, and his mother turned away to the stove very quick, and I pretended not to see that her eyes had gone bright, because she'd have hated for me to see it, and I was learning, even then, that there were things about her dignity a man had best pretend not to see. That is how it began, not with a decision. I never made a decision. I want that understood. A harder, wiser man than me would have done the right thing all at once and clean, kept them or sent them with his eyes open. I did neither. I just failed every single morning to be as firm as I'd meant to be the night before, and the failures piled up like the snow, and somewhere in the piling up they stopped being failures and became my life. She earned her place 10 times over before the first week was out, and she did it without ever once asking me to notice. The house came to a kind of order it had never known. My shirts, which I had worn frayed for years because mending was beyond me, came back to me mended. The larder, which I'd kept like a bear keeps a den, got set to rights so I could find a thing when I wanted it. And the food a man does not know, until a good cook comes into his house, how much of the gray weight he's been carrying was only ever hunger he'd stopped noticing. But it was more than the work. It was the way she did it. She never fawned and she never sulked. She met every day the way she'd met me at the stage, square and braced and not flinching, and she gave a full measure and a little over, and she asked for nothing, and there was a flintiness under her quiet that I came, slow, to admire more than I'd have admired any softness. I had taken her for meek. She wasn't meek. She was just a woman who had learned to keep her strength banked low so it wouldn't be taken from her. Once I understood that, I started watching for it, and once I started watching for it, I couldn't stop. The boy was a wonder. He was 11 and he worked like a man of 20, and he never complained and he never quit, and the only thing wrong with him was that he didn't yet believe a single good thing could last, so he was always working to deserve the next day, terrified that if he eased up for an hour we'd made a mistake and put them out. I knew that fear. I had worn it myself as a boy, after my own folks went and I got passed around among people who fed me for my labor and let me feel the cost of every meal. I saw it in Caleb, and it went into me like a splinter. I started finding reasons to work alongside him, to show him the things a man shows a boy: how to read a sky, how to gentle a green horse, how to set a snare, how to know when a cow's going to drop her calf wrong and what to do about it. And I told myself it was because I needed the help, and that was even half true. The girl took the longest. Ruth was 5 going on 6, and she decided I was a thing to be feared, and she wasn't wrong. I'd given her every reason that first night. For 2 weeks she'd flee the room when I came into it. So I did the only thing I knew, which was to leave her be and let her come to her own conclusions, the way you do with a skittish foal. And one evening I was sitting by the stove with my knife and a scrap of soft pine, whittling without much aim, and I felt her watching me from the doorway, and without looking up I started to make the pine into a horse. A little fat-legged pony of a horse, nothing fine. It took the better part of an hour, and she watched the whole time from the doorway, not coming closer, and when it was done I set it on the floor at the edge of the light, halfway between her and me, and I went back to picking at it with the knife dip like I'd forgotten it. And after a long while a small hand reached out from the shadow and took it. She didn't say anything. Neither did I, but the next night she sat a little closer, on the far end of the bench, and the night after that she had a list of further horses she required, delivered in a whisper to her brother, who delivered it to me with great seriousness. And that winter I carved a whole remuda of fat pine ponies, and somewhere in the carving of them, the splinter that boy had put in me worked its way clear into my heart and lodged there for good. Their mother watched all this. She watched everything. She never said a word about it, never thanked me for the horses or for working alongside the boy, because she understood, the way I understood, that to name a thing like that out loud would be to put a price on it, and these were not things that ought to have prices. But sometimes I'd look up from the boy or the horses and catch her looking at the 3 of us, the children and me. With something in her face she'd school away the instant she saw me see it, and I did not have a name for that something yet, and I was a coward about going looking for the name. The town had names for it, though. Holly's Crossing was 9 miles off, but a 9 miles means nothing to talk. I went in for supplies the 3rd week and felt it the moment I stepped into Crab's the little hitch in the conversation, the women's eyes sliding off me and to each other. The widow Mercer is keeping house for Amos Teague, and her with 2 children and him a bachelor all alone out there, and isn't it a sin and a shame? And have you heard? Crab himself, who'd known me 20 years, weighed my flour and said, "Careful, folks are talking some, Amos, about your arrangement, thought you'd want to know it." And I felt the old hot black anger come up, the same that had stood me at the foot of the loft ladder, except this time it wasn't pointed at her. This time I wanted to take Holly's Crossing apart board by board. "My arrangement," I said, "is that I pay an honest woman honest wages to cook and keep house, and her children earn their keep, and not one of them has cost this town a thing. You can tell folks I said so, or you can tell them to come say their piece to me direct." I said it quiet, which with me has always carried further than shouting, and Crab went a little gray and aloud as how he'd thought I'd want to know, and I said I was obliged to him and I wasn't, and I drove home with the anger riding with me the whole 9 miles. But I didn't tell her. I want that on the record too, among my list of wrongs. I didn't tell her the town was talking, because I couldn't think how to say it without saying the rest. The rest I hadn't let myself look at, and so I left her unguarded against a thing I'd seen coming. I told myself I was sparing her. A man can tell himself near anything if he says it low and firm enough. She found it out her own way, of course. There is no sparing a woman like Della Mercer. She'd have known by the set of my shoulders if nothing else. And one night after the children were asleep, with the wind down for once and the stove ticking, she stood across the kitchen from me with her hands folded and her chin up, that posture I'd learned to read now as the bracing of a person who is about to risk something, and she said, "I know what they're saying in town, Mr. Teague. I've known. And I won't have you ruined for sheltering us." She had it all worked out, the way she worked everything out, the way she'd worked out her speech in the doorway. "Come spring, I'll have wages enough saved to take the children to my cousin in the territory. She's no room and no kindness in her, but it's a roof, and it'll be no man's reputation but my own. You've been more than fair. We'll go in spring and there'll be an end to the talk." And here is the thing I have turned over in my mind every day of my life since. I almost let her. The coward in me, the man of 9 years careful quiet, opened his mouth to say something fair and firm, something about how that was sensible, how that was likely best, something that would have shut the door clean and sent the only good thing that had ever walked into the ironwood off to a roofless kindness in the territory in the spring. I got as far as the breath before the words. And then I made the mistake of looking at her chin up and her hands folded, and her whole brave braced body offering to be sent away first so that I would never have to do the sending, and the breath went out of me without any fair firm words in it at all, and what I heard myself say instead, in a voice I didn't know I had, was, "I don't want you to go in spring." It hung there in the kitchen between us. I'd never said a truer thing nor a more frightening one. I don't, and I had to stop and start again, because 9 years of quiet does not let go of a man's throat easy. I have been alone a long time, Mrs. Mercer. I made myself believe I liked it. I don't. I'd be obliged if you'd let me find a way that you could stay that the town couldn't make ugly. That's all I know how to say tonight." She looked at me a long time. The stove ticked. And then she said very low, "That's a great deal, Mr. Teague." And she didn't say yes and she didn't say no, and she went to her little room and shut the door soft, and I sat up the rest of the night by the stove not knowing whether I'd opened a door or only let the cold in. But in the morning she didn't speak again of the cousin in the territory, and that was the most that either of us could manage just then, and it was enough to go on with. It might have gone on slow and shy like that clear to spring. Two stubborn people circling a thing too big to say. If Harlan Mercer hadn't come up the road in December with the law at his side and a paper in his coat. He came on a gray, hard afternoon with the threat of more snow on it, 2 horses laboring up my track, and I knew before he was off his horse that he was kin to her, because he had her late husband's look about him, or what I'd guessed her late husband's look to be, a long, cold face. But where I imagined her husband's had been weak, this one's was only cold, cold all the way through. A banker's face. A face that did sums on people. The man with him I knew, Owen Stick, who carried a deputy's star for Sable County and a reasonable conscience along with it. Della had come out onto the porch behind me drying her hands, and I heard her go still, and I heard her say, low, "Harlan," and the whole temperature of the afternoon dropped past what the weather could account for. "Della," said Harlan Mercer, not getting down, "you've led me a chase. I had to learn from a storekeeper in Antelope Bend that my brother's widow had taken up as his cold eyes went over me, over the house, over the boy who had come around the corner of the barn with the maul still in his hand, as a housekeeper, with my brother's children out here with a strange man. He let it sit, the ugliness of it, the way a man lays a card face up. I've come to set it right. The children are Mercer's. They'll come back with me and be raised decent in a decent house, away from talk. I've a paper from the judge at Antelope Bend names me their guardian, their nearest kin of means, their mother being," and here he looked at her mendied dress and her cold cracked hands, "without the means to keep them. It's all in order, Della. Don't make a scene of it in front of the man." I felt her hand close on my sleeve from behind, just for a second. Then she let go and stepped up beside me, level with me, and she said, "They're my children, Harlan." "They're Mercer's," he said again, like that settled it, "and you're a charity case living off a bachelor's good name, and a judge has seen the sense of it. The boy can earn his board in my warehouse. The girl's young enough to forget all this. It's more than you can give them, and you know it, or you wouldn't have hid them in a hayloft like runaway slaves." He'd had that from the storekeeper too, the hayloft, and he used it like a knife. And I saw it land on her, the shame of that first night thrown back in her face, and I felt the old hot black anger come up in me one more time, except it had finally found, after all these years, the exact thing it had been made for. Owen Stick shifted in his saddle, unhappy. "Amos," he said, "the paper's real. I rode out because I'd not have it done with men I don't trust. But it's real, and the law's the law, and the man's their blood and has the judge behind him. I'm sorry for it, I am." And he was. I could see he was. But the law was the law, and a guardianship paper from a judge will take 2 children out of any house in the territory, and there is no quiet voice nor maul in a boy's hand that can stand against it. Caleb had come up to stand on his mother's other side, white-faced, the maul gripped so hard his knuckles shone, and the little girl had come to the door and was peering out, sensing the wrongness if not the words, and Della stood there between her children with her chin up and her hands folded and braced the way she'd been braced in every doorway of her life, for the thing to be taken, for the door to be shut, and I watched her get ready to be hit by the one blow she could not stand up under. And I understood, clear, finally, far too late and just barely in time, exactly what I had been too much a coward to look at all these weeks. "There's a flaw in your paper," I said. Harlan Mercer turned his cold face on me. "And what would a cattleman know about?" "It names her without means to keep them," I said. "It names her a charity case, a widow alone." I wasn't loud. I have never needed to be loud. She's none of those things. She's the wife of a man with a clear deed to 1,200 acres and the best water in Sable County. The children of that house aren't anybody's to come and take. I felt them all go still around me, the deputy and the cold man and the boy and the woman, all of them, and I turned and I looked at Della Mercer, only at her, and the rest of the world went off somewhere to the edges. "If she'll have me," I said. "It can't be a thing I do to you to keep your children, or it'd be no better than what he's doing. It has to be a thing you choose, free or not at all, and if you say not at all, I'll fight him in a court anyway, every dollar I've got, on your word alone. But I'm asking you, Della, not to save them, because I want to. I've wanted to since the morning that boy went out to break the trough ice and I couldn't be firm. Marry me, stay, all 3 of you, for good and for true, and not for any reason but that I'm asking. I have stood in a lot of weather in my life. I have never in my life been so afraid as I was in the little space of quiet after I'd said that, with the snow starting to come down soft and Owen Stick looking very hard at his saddle horn and Harlan Mercer's cold face curdling, and Della Mercer looking at me with both her hands come unfolded at last and hanging open at her sides like she'd forgotten what to do with them. And she didn't put her chin up. That's how I knew. For the first time since the stage, she didn't brace. She just looked at me with her face bare and her eyes running over, and she said, "Yes," plain and clear, so the deputy could witness it, so her cold brother-in-law could hear it, so her children could carry it the rest of their lives. "Yes, Amos, I'll have you. I've wanted to since the horses." And the boy made a sound I won't try to describe, and the little girl came running out into the cold, not understanding any of it except that her mother was crying and somehow it was good, and I put my arm around the 3 of them all at once, awkward as a man with no practice at it, and held on. Harlan Mercer's paper was so much waste after that, and he knew it. A guardianship granted on a widow's poverty doesn't survive the widow becoming the wife of the richest spread in the county, and no judge in the territory would hear it, and Owen Stick told him so, plain and with no small satisfaction. He sat his horse a moment longer doing his cold sums and finding they didn't come out, and then he turned without another word to any of us and rode back down my track into the falling snow, and I have not seen him since, and have not missed the seeing. Owen Stick got down and shook my hand and took his hat off to Della and said he'd stand witness any day of the week and was glad, gladder than the law allowed him to say, that he'd ridden out. Then he too rode off, and the 4 of us stood on the porch of the ironwood in the early dark with the snow coming down, and there was nobody left to be braced against. We were married 11 days later in the front room by the same reverend at Antelope Bend who'd vouched for her character, with Prout and Eli and Owen Stick and his wife for witnesses, and the children stood up beside us, and the little girl carried a pine horse in her fist the whole while because she would not be parted from it. The town had its talk turned inside out overnight, the way towns do. The scandal of the widow keeping a bachelor's house became the romance of the lonely rancher and the brave widow he'd wed, and the same women who'd slid their eyes off me at crabs now brought us pies and stood in our front room beaming like they'd planned the whole thing. And I let them, because I have found it costs a man nothing to let people remember themselves as kinder than they were, and it makes for easier neighbors. Della laughed about it with me at night, after in the dark, in the low voice that was hers and now mine, and her laughing in the dark of that house was a thing I'd have ridden through fire for, and have, near enough, in the years since. But I am getting ahead of the worst of that winter, and I won't cheat it, because it's the part that taught me what I'd married. In January, the real cold came, the cold that comes maybe twice in a man's life on the high plains, a still gray killing cold that froze the creek to its bed and put a crust on the snow that would bear a steer. And in the middle of it the little girl Ruth took a fever. It came on her in an afternoon, flushed and too quiet, then hot to the touch, then hot in a way that frightened me, and by midnight she was out of her head with it, not knowing her mother, her small body burning and shaking by turns, and the nearest doctor was at Holly's crossing 9 miles off through snow no road showed under. I have never seen anything in my life like Della Mercer that night. Della Teague, she was by then, my wife of a few weeks. She did not panic and she did not weep and she did not waste one motion. She had the girl stripped down and sponged with cool water against the fever before I had my coat half on, working with a terrible calm, talking low and steady to the child the whole time though the child couldn't hear her, and she looked up at me once with her face white as the snow and said only, "Bring Dr. Spear. Don't kill yourself doing it. I need you back, all of you. Ride smart." And then she bent back to her daughter and I went out into the worst night of my life. I won't lay out the ride. A man who's done it knows and a man who hasn't won't believe it. I will only say that the gelding I took was the best horse I ever owned, and he gave me everything he had and I felt him giving it. And the cold got into me so deep that there's a part of 2 fingers on my left hand that has never had full feeling since. And twice, I lost the track and found it again by luck, or by something better than luck. And I got to Dr. Spear's door and beat on it with a hand I couldn't feel and got him up and got him out, and the ride back with him was slower and worse. And the whole 9 miles each way I prayed, which I had not done with any sincerity in 9 years, prayed to be let keep this thing I had only just learned I could not live without. We made it back near dawn, and when I came through the door half frozen with the doctor behind me, the fever had broken. It had broken an hour before, in the deepest cold of the night, the girl coming back to herself sudden and weak and asking for water, and Della had been there for it, had held her daughter through the worst of it alone while I rode, had done the thing that no riding could do. And when I came in she was sitting by the bed with the child asleep and whole against her, and she lifted her face to me, and it was the face of a woman who has stood at the edge of the worst loss there is and not been taken over the edge. And we looked at each other across that little room, the doctor stamping snow behind me, and neither of us said one word, because there were no words that wouldn't have been smaller than the thing. I want to say a fair thing here, because it is the truest thing I know about that winter and about the years that came after. The story Holly's Crossing tells, the story the town settled on, is the story of how lonely Amos Teague took in a poor widow and her children and saved them. I have let the town keep its story because it pleases them and it's half true and there's no profit in correcting a town. But it isn't the true story, and to her in the dark, I have always told the true one. The true one is that I was the one being saved. I was a hard man going hard and cold and alone into the long winter of a wasted life, frozen solid as that creek, certain to my bones that I needed nobody and would die having proved it. and a worn, brave woman who had been knocked down by everything the frontier could throw at her, widowed, robbed of her home, scorned by her own kin, run to ground in a stranger's hayloft, got up. That was the whole of her. When you cut everything else away, she got up. They took her husband and she got up. They took her home and she got up. They came to take her children and she stood square in the door and would not go down. And I had spent 9 years believing that the strong thing, the only safe thing, was to stay down behind your own walls and feel nothing. And she showed me, just by getting up every single morning of that killing winter, that the strong thing is to keep rising, to keep your strength banked low and your chin up and your hands open to the next blow and the next morning both. I learned how to be a man from a woman who weighed half what I did. There's the true story. The town can keep its other one. We had more winters at the Ironwood, more than I can count now, and most of them were kinder than that first one, and a few were worse, and we met them all the same way, square and braced and together, which is a different and a better thing than braced alone. Caleb grew into the finest cattleman in 3 counties, and runs the Ironwood now that my back's gone and my hands won't hold a rope, and he runs it better than I ever did. And he married a good woman, and there are children of his that climb on me and call me grandfather, though there's not a drop of my blood in them. And I would knock down any man who tried to make them feel the difference, the way I was made to feel it as a boy. Ruth, little Ruth, who hid behind her mother's skirts and required a remuda of pine horses. Ruth is a grown woman with a houseful of her own out in the territory, and she still has every one of those fat-legged ponies on a shelf in her parlor, and her own children play with them. And she sends me a letter every month in that same fine, clear hand her mother had, and signs them the way her mother taught her, with love that she does not need to ration anymore. Della is gone these 2 years now. I won't say more about that than that I was holding her hand at the end the way she held her daughter's hand through the fever, and that she went without bracing, with her hands open, looking at me, and that the last thing she said was that she'd wanted to stay since the horses, which had been our joke and our truest thing for 40 years, and that I am an old man who has done his weeping and is not ashamed of it. I post no advertisements anymore. There's no need. The house is full of family, and the quiet I once thought I wanted has been driven out of every corner of it, thank God, and good riddance to it. But I keep her letter, the first one, the one written on paper folded soft as cloth, that told me the whole truth and left out the part that mattered most. I keep it in the box with my list of wrongs. And when I take it out and read it, a widow can cook and keep house, not afraid of hard work, I think of her standing braced in the doorway of the stage with her chin up, ready for the door to be shut, having decided not to flinch, and I think how near I came, how very near to being firm. And then I go out on the porch in the evening and watch Caleb's children chase each other through the yard of the Ironwood in the last of the light, hollering, alive here. And I think whatever it is that runs this hard and beautiful world, that on the night it mattered most I was, for once in my life, too weak a man to shut the door.